Okay, well, Grover Norquist here, President of Americans for Tax Reform. Every year around April 15th, although they keep not having it quite exactly April 15th the last 2 years, we do a press conference with some of the pro-taxpayer leaders in the House and Senate, talking about what's happening, what's about to happen. And today we're going to talk about what happened with the tax bill, the benefits to economic growth and for taxpayers, but also there'll be a good discussion, more than one discussion, about what next. What is phase two? What is part two here? As we move along, I want just step one is to talk about. I will mention that at the website atr.org, right front and center, John Karch has put together a list of all the known companies that have announced because of the Republican tax cut, we have given bonuses or pay raises or various benefit increases. ATR.org, it's a list of 500 companies. We're constantly looking for smaller companies who we may not have heard from, and it includes the large companies like AT&T and Walmart and so on, but also some medium-sized companies, one of which is here today to talk about her experience. And secondly, on the question of what to do next, on everybody's chair is a letter that was sent today, about 3 minutes ago, to Secretary Mnuchin, pointing out that the Secretary has the authority to index capital gains for inflation, that he can do a regulatory clarification and say that the cost basis for capital gains is historic cost plus inflation. He also received two legal studies by Chuck Cooper which make exactly this case and point out that when this exact case from the FCC went to the Supreme Court in 2002, the FCC said, we say the cost of something is what you bought for it plus inflation. Verizon didn't like that, and Verizon took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, this is perfectly within the realm of what the FCC can do. Cost is not an unambiguous term, and it can mean historic cost, cost plus inflation, or even a replacement cost. So we're urging the Secretary to act on this, and this project and having the Secretary do it has been endorsed both by the Speaker of the House and the head of the Ways and Means Committee as well. That said, I'd like to ask Cathy McMorris Rodgers, Chair of the House Republican Conference, to present first.
All right. Thank you, Grover.
Absolutely.
Great to be here. This is the week that many Americans will be putting the finishing touches on their taxes. And you know, as you sit down and file those taxes, you're reminded at this process that is time-consuming, complicated, and costs you way too much. And for families, that's more time that they could be spending with their kids. And for businesses, it's more money that they could actually be investing in their employees. The good news is, 1 week from today, that will be the old system. So next year at this time, more Americans will be able to file on a much simpler form. You won't have to tell the IRS if you have health insurance or not because the individual mandate is repealed. Next year, families will be able to take advantage of an expanded child tax credit, the doubling of the standard deduction, and most importantly, for that average family of four making $73,000, this will be a tax cut of $2,059. We will officially say goodbye to a broken tax code that's as old as floppy disk, CDs, and dial-up. Next year it will be a lot simpler, and we'll all be celebrating. And even right now, you see where the jobless claims are going up. They're going down. Jobless claims are going down. Wages are going up. Consumer confidence is on the rise. I'm most excited as to the optimism that I hear. Just a couple of weeks ago, just before Easter, I was visiting Sondran Packaging, third-generation business in Spokane, where their employees are getting anywhere from $70 to $300 more in each of their paychecks. And the optimism gives people hope, and that's what we want for people. So I just want to say thank you, Grover. I know that you fought for this for a very long time, and I appreciate your leadership at Americans for Tax Reform and helping highlight this legislation that is going to mean a better life and more opportunities for Americans all across this country. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you very much. Joined now by Representative David Kustoff from Tennessee's 8th District. Congressman Kustoff.
Thank you, Grover, and I want to thank you and Americans for Tax Reform for your leadership on this effort. We're really seeing the benefit, and I've got to tell you, we could not have done it. We as a Congress and we as an American people could not have done tax reform, these big tax cuts, without the leadership from President Donald Trump. He is the straw that stirs the drink, and he led the effort. But you look at the benefits of it now. Last year, we created 2 million new jobs. I think because the markets and employers anticipated what we gave them, and that was tax reform. Low unemployment rates, 4.1%, which is the lowest unemployment rate in 17 years. And you look at how hard we had to work, all of us, to get tax reform and the benefits of it now. I visited with a small employer in my district in West Tennessee in February, right after the schedules had come into effect. And it's an 8 or 10 person business. The man and his wife do the payroll manually. He told me that they pay their employees each week. Their pay period is each week. Their employees on average were getting an additional $15 to $20 per pay period per week. So if somebody's getting an additional $20 per week, do the math, that's $1,000 a year. That is not small, that is life-changing. And then the businesses in my district, FedEx, which gave bonuses, is doing over $1 billion expansion in their hub in Memphis because of tax reform. Good businesses like First Horizon, First Tennessee Bank, which gave bonuses, but also raised their minimum wage to $15 an hour. That's the Republican way to raise minimum wage, by creating the economic incentive and the economic opportunities. I tell you what I think should be next, and that is that we need to make these tax cuts permanent for everybody, for all individuals, and not let them expire. I think that all of us here feel the same way, and that we will do that. And I appreciate your time, appreciate your attention, and appreciate the support that all of you have given to us as a Congress, and to the leadership and to the President to make sure this happens. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Two numbers to remember. 90% of Americans have lower taxes because of the tax cut. 90% of Americans have a pay increase because your take-home pay goes up. Tax cuts are pay increases. Tax cuts are pay increases. Second number is 91 million households and businesses are seeing lower utility bills because utilities are required to pass along the lower federal taxes in lower rates. So it's not commented on much, but take a check in each of your neighborhoods. DC was the first to announce, Pepco, that they would be reducing people's utility bills because of the tax cut. Just a benefit often missed. Next to join us is Representative Rodney Davis from the great state of Illinois.
Thanks, Grover. Appreciate being here. Hey, thank you, Grover, and also to all the folks at Americans for Tax Reform for not only inviting me here to participate today, but for being the champions for the hardworking men and women in this country who deserve to keep more of what they earn. Over the last couple of months, I've been visiting workers throughout my district to make sure the first major tax reform bill in 31 years is working. 31 years, let that sink in. I don't know what Grover looked like 31 years ago, but I look pretty good. A great mullet, great mustache, and I was 16 years old. That was the last time that our tax code was reformed. Now, I have the privilege, not knowing then as a 16-year-old, that I get a chance to work with people like Grover Norquist and Americans for Tax Reform and actually put more money in the pockets of the constituents I'm blessed to serve. One of the companies I visited was in Litchfield, Illinois. It's a town of about 7,000 people. And their largest employer just raised wages, gave workers $1,000 bonuses, and expanded maternity and paternal benefits. These benefits meant something to each of them, and they certainly weren't just crumbs. Millions of hardworking middle-class Americans who have been left behind by Washington for far too long are seeing more in their paychecks today because of employer investments and Washington taking less of their hard-earned money. And as was said before, tax day next year, Americans are still going to continue to save. The average family of four making the median income of roughly $78,000 in my district will see a tax cut of roughly $1,691. But we need to make these tax cuts permanent for hardworking families. It was unfortunate we couldn't get just 8 or so Democrat senators to help pass the House bill, which made the individual rates permanent. If we don't want to go back to a tax code that only benefits the wealthy and raise taxes on millions of Americans, we need to make these provisions permanent, and frankly, we shouldn't wait. I've introduced H.R. 4886, the Permanent Tax Cuts for Americans Act, which makes the individual rates permanent for the life of this entire new tax reform bill. We need to continue to build on tax reform, which has helped workers in the towns I visited throughout my district, like Litchfield, Champaign, Taylorville, Springfield, Clinton, and many, many more. And we need to make sure that their paychecks and their opportunities to grow their careers continue to move forward, and that's exactly what's happening because of the hard work of folks like you and ATR, Grover, and the hardworking Americans who gave us the opportunity to pass this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. You have added to my bucket list. I've never had a mullet before. But
Next time.
now I'm going to have to do this. One more number. In 1980, the top 1% of taxpayers paid 17.4% of all the income taxes. 2014, it was up to 40%. So as we began the process of cutting marginal tax rates and getting more economic growth, the higher income brackets actually paid an increasingly large percentage of the income tax bracket. So not only are lower marginal tax rates good for economic growth, they're good from a progressive standpoint in terms of distributional questions. We're now joined by Representative Mike Kelly. Hey.
Good to see you. Thanks, Grover. Good to be with you. My understanding is you're from Sharon, Pennsylvania.
I am. I was born there.
Yeah,
I was young at the time.
Yeah, I represent that area, actually. First of all, thank you all for being here. And I think when we talk about this, now Grover's been fighting this fight for so long because the idea from day one was about pro-growth tax reform, right? So it was making our corporations a point where they could actually compete globally. They wouldn't have to leave the United States to still be profitable. They would stay here. The other thing was more take-home pay for everyday hard-working Americans. And I think that's the key that sometimes people forget because I keep hearing it was only for the rich. It is not only for the rich. In every measurable way, this economy has soared under this pro-growth tax reform. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act has been incredible, right across the board. And so for anybody to say that somehow it didn't affect people, what I've done for a living is sell cars. I'm an automobile dealer. And I tell people all the time, you have to actually sit across from somebody who worries about every penny they have to spend, that looks at it and looks at it in a way that most people wouldn't. Now, a lot of people down here use laptops. You know what they use back where I'm from? They use one of those little tablets, those little spiral tablets. And when I'm sitting down talking with people, the conversation that goes is, once we've selected something to purchase, the husband looks to the wife and says, honey, can we afford this? And she goes to that spiral tablet and she says, you know what? No, it's just a little bit too much. And so when I hear people talk about, look, they're only going to get $1,500, $1,600, $2,000 a year, I deal with people who pennies make a difference. Pennies make a difference. And I think if we ever get away from the fact that we're here representing those folks and we think it's another group, we've lost our way. Allowing hard-working Americans to keep more of their own tax dollars was the whole goal. We were able to do that. We were also able to make our own businesses globally competitive so they can stay right here. They didn't leave the United States because they weren't patriotic. They left the United States because they couldn't be profitable anymore. It's that simple. They couldn't make the investments they needed to make. They couldn't do the things they wanted to do with benefits packages. They couldn't make the investments in new tools and new equipment and in education. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is an incredible boost to our economy. We're watching it take off. You know what the biggest surprise is? Is it happened on day one as opposed to a year later. Because, as Kathy just said a couple minutes ago, we just did for the last time the old tax code. And people say, well, wait till you see it kick in. It kicked in, and kicked in early. Investments benefits, and more than anything else, people that came to work every day and got every day with a smile on their face said, you know what, I get to keep more of my own earned cash. That was the whole key. This guy, though, has been fighting that fight for a long time. That's from Sharon, Pennsylvania, by the way. You may have been little when you were down there, but I'll tell you what, it's the same people. They are hardworking Americans. They care more about their families and their future than they do about themselves. And I think that's what we were able to accomplish with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So listen, God bless you all for being here today. I think we're on a trajectory right now that despite what some people would say, they can't deny the results. Every measurable way, we're in a better shape today than we were before we got this bill done. So thanks so much, Grover. Thank you for keeping that fight alive. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. The comment was on how money's flowing back to the United States, money that was trapped. American corporations own money, earned money overseas in Japan or France, and then it was trapped because if you brought it back to the United States, you had to pay taxes on it. We were one of the few countries in the world that had a worldwide tax system instead of a territorial tax system. If you have a French company making money in the United States and they bring it back to France, they say that's great. If you're an American company making money in France, you want to bring it back, we say we want to tax it some more. And that has locked a lot of money overseas, maybe several $1 trillion. As that begins to come back, it tremendously advantages the country. One thing that I would point out is that some of our friends on the left say, yeah, but Apple's going to use some of it to buy Apple stock. Okay, think this through. First of all, Apple says, we've got several $1 billion. What's the best thing we can do with several $1 billion? If they'd said, let's go invest in Google, I'd worry about Apple's future. It is a good sign when Apple decides that the thing to do with $1 billion is to buy more of your own stock. That makes the price of Apple stock go up. The half of the country, 60% of workers who have 401ks and IRAs see the value of their life savings go up. Those with union defined benefit contracts to see the value that is behind their pensions increase, and everyone's better off. And the money doesn't disappear. Apple bought those shares from some other American, and that person then invests someplace else. There seems to be some mistake on some of our Democrat friends that if you have a buyback, the money disappears. No, it doesn't. It just goes into other investments. We're now joined by Representative Eric Paulson.
Sure. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Sure. Let me just start out by thanking Grover and ATR for putting us together today. And look, I'll start out by saying I've got one question for hardworking taxpayers and families. Are you better off today than you were 15 months ago? And I'm chairman of the Joint Economic Committee now, where my staff of economists and I crunch the numbers every single week. And things are looking pretty good. Business optimism is up. Capital investment is up. The economy is improving steadily, and GDP is moving in the right direction. Unemployment is now down at 4.1% for six straight months, something we haven't seen since the year 2000. And some thought that this wasn't going to be possible, that we would have to settle for meager economic growth, especially the last administration. As far as I'm concerned, that would be true if you assumed the worst and felt that the only way forward was to have the government take over the economy. But we know better. And that's because we believe in the American people. Our dreams as a nation don't rely on government, fiat, or foreign influence, but on the resourcefulness, the innovativeness, the hard work of everyday Americans. And that's why we passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Just yesterday, Rick Hampton, who is a family small business owner in Minnesota, testified before the Joint Economic Committee. He runs circuit interruption technology. And he said clearly that for every dollar in profit that he was taking in would soon be whittled away by taxes, and eventually he would have only 35 cents on the dollar left for his company operation. And the long-term drag of a broken tax code had been encouraging American employers to move their manufacturing, their innovation, their research and development, their jobs, and their headquarters overseas. But after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, things are very different. And folks like Rick are now investing in their employees. He gave his employees a 1-week pay bonus. He gave his employees a raise. He gave every one of his employees a 5% bump on their 401k. And he's hiring more people. And he's even more notably now, evaluating the opportunity and the possibility of bringing all of his manufacturing back to America because of a new tax code. And that's just one story. But it does show the progress we're making in believing in the American worker and job creators instead of just empowering Washington. So let's get back to my initial question, which is, Are you better off now than you were 15 months ago? Probably so, because already we're seeing very encouraging results, and I will say it's only going to get better. And why is this happening? Because we have embraced a vision that lets Americans keep more of their hard-earned money, lets Americans get back to work, it lets our prosperity grow back into our own country here in the United States, and we now recognize that America's greatest asset is the American people. And we know that having faith in the American economy and the American people will prove that America's best days are yet ahead. Thanks very much for having me, for
Thank you.
continuing the charge.
Thank you for joining us. I'm going to call on Paula Hinton next. She is the owner of Five Senses Spa, Salon, and Barbershop, a businesswoman who I'm fond of because we're both immigrants. She's from Italy and I came from Massachusetts. But Paula, if you could talk about how the tax bill has affected your business and your son.
My name is Paula Pinello Hinton, and I am the daughter of immigrant parents from Casteldaccia, Sicily in Italy. I have no business being here today. In 1970, my father immigrated here at the age of 25, and he came here for the land of opportunity, the American dream. He went back, married my mother, brought her back, and started a family in Gurnee, Illinois with 4 children, and that's where I grew up. My first language that I spoke was Sicilian Italian, and I still speak it today, and I went to school in kindergarten not knowing how to speak English, and I said my first words in 1st grade. I really, really have no business being here. I went to Illinois State University, where I double majored in marketing and international business. I met my husband, Steve, and his employer, Caterpillar, moved us up to Calgary, Canada for a couple of years. When we returned back to what was their headquarters in Peoria, Illinois, we got settled in, and I thought of this idea of opening up a spa and salon. He told me, "You're crazy. You don't know how to cut hair, you don't know how to do nails, you don't know how to do massages or facials, and that's what you're gonna open?" I'm proud to say that this June, we will be celebrating 12 years of Five Senses Spa, Salon, and Barbershop. So I have no business being in this business, truly. So I look to the opportunity to be able to offer jobs locally. What I brought to the community was a high-end Aveda Spa and Salon. We employ over 20 employees, and we offer benefits that are not normal in this industry. Everything from paid time off, vacation, simple IRA, retirement plans, profit sharing, employee assistance program, and so on. On December 22nd, 2017, my husband came home that day and he said, "Paula, something big really happened today." So as the tax reform bill became law, we decided that we were going to give bonuses to our team members at Five Senses. So I nonchalantly walked into the bank and I asked for 100 $100 bills. Of course, they looked at me a little funny, saying, "Paula, what are you doing?" And I said that basically I needed the money, and I called an all-employee team meeting. And I walked in with a briefcase of $10,000. I opened it up, and I asked everybody if they've ever seen $10,000 before. And I energetically gave $500 to every single employee. It's on Facebook. It's a priceless moment. It was fantastic. So what the tax reform is doing for business owners like myself is it's allowing for us to be able to continue to offer jobs, better benefits. And for me personally, I'm able to now revisit healthcare that I once provided for our team members that we're hoping to be able to reintroduce again. I believe as though that the employers that are out there will do the right thing if they're given the opportunity. And I see that over the 30 years that it took for this tax reform, I'll guarantee you that nobody working on that bill around the clock so many hours had any idea that this was how the business community was going to respond with all of these bonuses. So with that, we hope to be able to do more of this in Peoria, Illinois, where we're currently hiring for more cosmetologists, barbers, massage therapists, and we're hoping to be able to continue to grow. I couldn't do it without the support because it takes a lot of hours. Sacrifice from my 2 little girls at home, my loving husband who's always there for me, my parents who are taking care of my children right now, and my extended family as well. I couldn't do it without them because it takes a lot of hours in order to be able to do so. But I do it all to be able to offer the careers for the employees and the teams that we have at Five Senses, which I must say, we have a rockin' team at Five Senses Spa, Salon, and Barbershop. And that's where you will find me, minding my own business in a business that I belong in. Thank you.
How do you say cut taxes in Sicilian Italian?
Tagliasse. That's in Sicilian.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And no mullet, no mullet.
No mullet? Oh, well. My bucket list just got shorter then. I mentioned the letter that I sent to Mnuchin, walking through both the legal case and the economic case for indexing the cost basis of capital gains to inflation. It takes inflation from being taxed in capital gains. About 45% of all capital gains paid by recognized by Americans is actually inflation. So to take inflation out of capital gains for individuals is to, in effect, cut the tax on capital gains in half and make it easier for people to sell houses, land, businesses. On the corporate side, where the capital gains rate's 21%, that's a larger percentage than 50% because companies live longer than people. There are businesses in this town that have owned buildings for decades and decades and decades, and to sell a building or to sell land is very expensive on capital gains. It's estimated that $7 trillion would change hands of land and assets would in fact change hands if we cut the capital gains tax in half from where it is at present. That would be a tremendous boost to the economy, both in terms of revenue coming into the government from more capital gains, but it also would be an incredible deregulation. It would be moving property, land, stocks from somebody who has them now and only holds on to them because they don't want to pay the big tax to somebody who actually wants to do something with them. So the benefit of this would be extremely dramatic, and you would feel it as soon as the decision is made. So we're looking to get this done over the next couple of months and working with folks in the House and Senate to build the case for it, and in the administration as well. And now, Katie McAuliffe on the internet sales tax and the Supreme Court decision, and how many years have they been trying to tax? Well, first, before the internet, they wanted to tax catalogs. If you're old enough to remember that everybody was going to buy everything on catalogs, and therefore the sales tax would disappear, and then it was the internet. So, Katie, status.
Thanks. So yeah, there's a major decision going on before the Supreme Court about online sales taxes. And the problem that we have is a lot of states seem to think they aren't collecting enough revenue. This is revenue that they could collect, however, they don't want to upset their own voters. So they've found kind of a sneaky way to go about this, and they've set up laws to tax across state borders. That way that they can get people who don't actually vote for them and have no recourse at the ballot box to pay their sales taxes and fund their government projects. Now, this is really misguided. I mean, when you think about it, a lot of times states give tax breaks or bonuses to companies to come into their state. That opportunity is never afforded to out-of-state businesses. These out-of-state businesses would be subject to the state IRSs of all 50 states, 10,000 taxing jurisdictions. That means they could be called into court across borders. They could be subject to tax liens. They could be subject to all types of legal proceedings, which really isn't in the spirit of fairness. There's not sufficient nexus for taxing. What am I talking about when I say nexus? Well, a lot of times we say the justification for a tax is to pay for education, law enforcement, firefighters. A business that is out of state doesn't have sufficient nexus there. That's not what they're doing. And these are small businesses. Businesses that are selling online all over the country have physical presence everywhere. They know that that's valuable. They know that the closer they are to their customers, the faster the products will get there. And that is of value to them. But the really small businesses are the ones that stay in their home state. They create business there where they have their roots. So to have, say, a business in Tennessee being taxed by the Department of Revenue and gone after by the Department of Revenue in Washington really doesn't make any sense. It's just a way for politicians to go after folks who can't vote for them. So right now, before the Supreme Court, there's a law that was passed by South Dakota. This South Dakota law would allow them to reach across borders and collect sales taxes. And there's a big battle. And this is really, really important because the idea of physical presence, of actually being physically present where you're taxed and being able to vote for those who are taxing you is very important. There should be no taxation without representation. There should be no regulation without representation. Being able to tax businesses across your borders allows you to regulate them as well. I mean, you end up with the egg sellers or farmers in other places being required to adjust their cage sizes or adjust labeling, any kind of these instances. So it's a major problem and it's a case to watch. Physical presence is the best way to go about handling this, and online sales tax is just, it's a really bad thing. Thanks.
Good. Hopefully the Supreme Court's listening. If the president's listening, Amazon likes internet sales taxes. You don't hurt them by imposing internet sales taxes on their competitors. They already, in most of the 57 states, are paying those sales taxes. It's some of its smaller competitors that can't afford to do that. So if you're mad at Amazon, don't sign a bill to tax across state lines. Now, we are joined by Congressman David Schweikert.
Does the 57 joke still work?
It does, for really
Because
clever
it's not
people.
sort of paged
They're
out.
all clever. They caught it. They just go, they're being very subtle with their laughter. So, yes. And
Sorry,
a man,
known each other for like forever.
man who's never had a mullet, David Schweikert.
Yeah. A what?
Okay, that was my point. You didn't have one. We had a congressman here earlier talking about his mullet a while ago.
Yeah.
No?
No
Okay.
mullet. Matter of fact, it's. Have you ever met the kids that were like the president of your high school math club?
Okay, now you're getting
Yeah.
personal.
Yeah. It's one of the reasons A, you have no friends, and B, everyone asks you to try to help them with their taxes. Look, my name's David Schweikert. I'm blessed to be on the Ways and Means Committee. And for who are my folks that actually do some research or do reporting or do any writing? There's some actually really, okay, a couple. There's actually a couple really interesting things out there that should be part of the debate of how do you maximize economic expansion and growth right now. And one of them is one of the things that's just driving me a little crazy is trying to work out baseline type numbers. I can take you back about ancient history, 3 months ago, when we were finishing up parts of the tax reform. And it was out the door in December. We were seeing some of the scoring, and we'd get some of the scoring from the Tax Foundation or some certain private groups that were nonpartisan, that were doing big models. And they were coming in saying, hey, you're going to get almost $1 trillion of new revenues from the new size of the economy, almost $300 billion in new payroll taxes during that time, which is really powerful for helping us shore up our crisis that's coming in Social Security and Medicare. And then a couple days ago, I get the CBO numbers, and the CBO numbers are saying, it's probably a little less than $500 billion. Something's wrong in the way we model when I have groups that we both rely on and just these massive swings, because it makes public policy sometimes a little difficult. And the fact of the matter is, you want to respect and love CBO, but they continually come in wrong. But there's also something that's really powerful. And if you have anyone from the left who wants to come to you and say, the tax reform is driving the deficit over the next decade, it just isn't true. If you take a look at the number, just the growth, and this is really uncomfortable, from Social Security and Medicare, during that 10 years, is $11.5 trillion. It's not what we did in tax reform. Matter of fact, lifting the BCA caps, the Budget Control Acts, is almost equivalent, according to CBO, just raising those to what CBO and how they were scoring the tax reform.
they're a fraction of just what's our growth in our entitlements. The only solution is we're going to have to continue to adopt these types of tax policies that I believe maximize economic expansion. Because the reality with where we are demographically, tax policy, trade policy, immigration policy, the adoption of technology, and we have to do them all at the same time. Because if we don't dramatically start increasing the size of this economy, I can't make the math work in any fashion. So we've accomplished one of the first steps, but we still have so much more we have to do. Grover, thank you for letting me visit.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us. And thank you for
Trying out the trick.
Yeah, that's, somebody's trying to get us to. Actually, I'd like to ask Paula to do the next introduction. You're a congressman.
I am not a congressman.
No, you were introducing your congressman.
Yes.
Okay.
I have the pleasure to actually have hosted the congressman in March earlier, a couple weeks ago, and he came and visited Five Senses Spa and Salon. This is Representative Darren LaHood of the 18th District for Illinois. Darren. He did not have a mullet. We did not cut any mullets off of him.
Can you speak Sicilian?
He cannot speak Sicilian, but I will be training him soon. And with that, it's very nice to be able to see the individuals come into your businesses to actually see things happening. And what was neat is that $10,000 that I explained in that same team lounge, it kind of came full circle. He was back there in that team lounge, and he was able to talk to all the employees, and they were all sharing as to what they did with that money. So Representative Darren LaHood.
Thanks, Paul. Grover, thank you. And Paula, thanks for the introduction. I'm Congressman Darren LaHood, Illinois' 18th Congressional District. Very proud to be here. Peoria, Illinois is my hometown. And happy to be up here and advocate for comprehensive tax reform. And obviously, Paula is much more important than I am. She's somebody that actually is taking advantage and who we wanted to benefit when we passed comprehensive tax reform. When we thought about what we wanted to do in comprehensive tax reform, for me, really looking at two important things. How do we help the lower and middle class in giving more money back to them so that they can use that to expand their business or use it in their personal life for their children and their livelihood? And then secondly, how do we get the economy roaring again? How do we get it healthy and robust and competitive through comprehensive tax reform? And I think we accomplish both those things. And I look at a district like mine, which is a middle-class district in west central Illinois. The average family of four in my district that makes $65,000 a year, it gets back about $2,600 a year. Now, some people think that is crumbs, and describe it as crumbs. It is not crumbs. It is real money. And you see the results of that every day. And frankly, I don't think we've done a good enough job of talking about it and promoting it. And I know that's why we're here today, Grover. And so thank you for what you and what your organization is doing on that. But when I went to Paula's salon and barbershop there, and I saw firsthand meeting with her employees, these are folks that don't follow politics. So they don't follow what goes on here in Washington, D.C., but they know what $500 means. And to hear their stories on what they did to use that money, whether it was saving up for a vacation, paying off their credit cards from Christmas, buying a new washing machine, saving up for their children's education, real money being spent in a real community. And that's what we brought with comprehensive tax reform. And we need to use this as an example, again, for how we get the economy going. And I look at where we're at today in terms of lowest unemployment in 40 years. We've created 2.8 million jobs in the last 14 months. Look at the fact that we're having more jobs and opportunities. Private sector wages are going up. And comprehensive tax reform helped with that. And going and seeing what Paula has done. Paula could have taken that $10,000 and put it back into her business, but she didn't. And to see the joy and the level of happiness that came to those employees from that $500 cannot be underestimated. So, Paula, I salute you for what you've done, and for all the other businesses out there, whether you're small, medium, or large, and what you've done to give back to the community. We look forward to continuing to work on comprehensive tax reform to get this economy going and make sure that we are always looking out for the free enterprise system and a pro-growth economy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Grover. this is the discussion today about the tax reduction and the Jobs Creation Act that was passed is not completely in a vacuum. The Democrats did not put an alternative before the House and the Senate for a vote last year, or even present one, but now Schumer has put one on the table. And Senator Schumer wants $1 trillion in tax increases. He's gone through, wants to bring the AMT back, he wants to bring rates back up, he wants to raise the business tax rates up to take about $400 billion out of the economy. The one thing that makes us able to compete with China and other countries, we used to be at a 35% rate. Socialist China was at 25%. So when we think of ourselves as the big free market country, but internationally when we compete, our businesses get hit with a 35% rate up till this year, and the Chinese are paying 25%. The Irish are paying 12.5%. For our friend Mr. Schumer to decide he's got $1 trillion tax increase waiting for us, it lets you know that the two rather directly diverging paths before us. Either we can continue on the path of getting rates down, or we can go back to the old effort to keep raising taxes, as Schumer has said, and unfortunately as Hillary had in her packages as well. We're now joined by Senator Ted Cruz from the great state of Texas, from the Senate. Senator, what's new, what's different, what's going to happen next?
Well, Grover, great to be with you. Thank you, folks, for coming out. We have a lot to celebrate in terms of substantive accomplishments for the American people. First year and a half of the new administration, of Republican majorities in both houses, we've been able to deliver on a number of our most important promises to the voters. None is more important than the victory of tax reform. In December of last year, we saw Republicans in both houses come together after a whole lot of work, after a whole lot of blood and sweat and tears, come together and unify on an historic tax cut. Let me thank ATR for the great work, Grover, you do, your team does, making the case that when you cut people's taxes, it makes it easier for them to provide for their families. It makes it easier for them to provide for their kids. It makes it easier for small businesses to grow. And we're seeing the economic benefits of this tax cut even just a few months into it. Over 4 million Americans have already gotten pay raises or bonuses directly as a result of the tax cut. A couple of months ago I was on Southwest Airlines. A flight attendant walked up to me, hugged me, and said, "Thanks for the raise." I said, "You're welcome." That is impacting people all across this country, and it's impacting the state of Texas. As I talk to small business owners in Texas, there is an optimism that is incredible. You're seeing small business owners who are investing capital, who are expanding operations, who are opening new facilities, who are hiring new employees, who are raising wages, and the tax cut is a big, big, big part of that. We took the corporate tax rate that was the highest in the developed world, 35%. We cut that all the way down to 21%. Instead of jobs fleeing America and going overseas, you're now seeing jobs coming back from other countries, coming back to America. We allowed immediate expensing of capital expenditures, something I fought very hard for, which is incredibly pro-growth. It means a farmer or rancher, if you're buying a new tractor, instead of depreciating it over a whole lot of years, you expense it right now, which leads to investment in new capital, new jobs, higher wages. We saw taxes on small businesses reduced across the board, which is leading to new investments and new opportunities for families. We saw the standard deduction doubled from $12,000 a couple to $24,000 a couple, which means starting next year, 90% of Americans will fill out your taxes on a postcard. Now, personally, I think that should be 100%. I think we need to keep working towards a flat tax and ultimately to abolish the IRS. But that being said, 90% is an awfully good start. It is a big, big improvement towards simplification. We saw marginal rates reduced across the board for every level of the marginal rates, which means working families have more of their money in their pockets. We saw the child tax credit doubled from $1,000 per child per year to $2,000 per child per year, which makes a real difference for families who are struggling in terms of actually keeping the money. That's the difference between being able to pay for summer camp for your son, being able to pay to get braces on your junior high daughter, being able to take that family vacation that you put off 3-4 years because you didn't have the money. That extra money in the bank is the difference between being able to take the whole family down to the beach and play in the sand. That makes a difference in families' lives. Not only that, we saw incredible conservative victories as part of tax cuts. Part of the tax reform legislation was repealing the Obamacare individual mandate. One of the most unfair, one of the most oppressive parts of Obamacare. That's something I was proud to lead the fight for in the Senate. Just 6 months ago, nobody thought we could get it done. And then in December, we had in the Senate all 52 Republicans stand together and deliver on our promise to repeal the individual mandate. That was real tax relief for the 6.5 million people getting fined every year by the IRS because they can't afford health insurance. And another tremendous victory in this tax bill is expanding College 529 savings plans, what ended up being the most significant federal school choice legislation in history. In the Senate, it was an amendment I introduced to take these tax advantage plans, expand them, so in addition to saving for college, now parents and grandparents can save for K-12 education, can save for public school, private school, parochial school, religious school, up to $10,000 per child per year. That passed the Senate 50-50 with the Vice President breaking the tie. And as a result, we provided real relief and help to up to 50 million school kids across the country. There's a lot to celebrate. But let me say, we should not be done. A tremendous victory in December 2017 is something to celebrate, but we should use that as encouragement. Let's go further. You know, in the weeks after the tax bill passed, Bernie Sanders was on one of the Sunday shows. And Jake Tapper asked him, said, listen, virtually every middle-class taxpayer in America is getting a tax cut as a result of this. Isn't this a good thing? And Bernie said, yes, it's a wonderful thing. But the problem is it isn't permanent. Well, I saw that and promptly tweeted out a reply. I included Bernie's link. And I said, Bernie, I agree with you. And I've drafted legislation to make the individual tax cuts permanent. Bernie, join me. Together, if we stand together, we can get this done. Permanent tax relief for taxpayers across America. Oddly enough, I haven't heard back from Bernie. It's been crickets chirping. But we ought to follow through to make the individual tax cuts permanent. We ought to follow through to make expensing permanent. We ought to follow through to make the small business tax cuts permanent. We ought to keep moving forward and prioritizing jobs, 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 because that's the priority of the American people. Grover, thank you.
Absolutely. I mentioned the time again.
Oh. Another bill that I'm introducing this week is a bill to index capital gains. That will provide real relief to investors who are providing capital. Right now, if you invest, let's say you invest $1,000, and then 10 years later you sell whatever you've invested in for $2,000. Right now you're taxed on that full gain, ignoring inflation, ignoring the fact that inflation has eaten away a big chunk of that gain. Indexing capital gains for inflation means you would be taxed on actually what you've gained, on the increase above and beyond inflation. It is a pro-growth, pro-investment policy decision, because what it would do is encourage people to put more capital, to invest more capital in businesses. And when you're investing more capital in businesses, it means you're hiring more people, it means you're buying more equipment, it means you're raising wages, you're driving economic growth. That's yet another example. We need to be delivering real results. And I don't believe we should rest on our laurels. We accomplished a great deal in 2017, but we need to keep moving forward in 2018 and do more. And when it comes to tax cuts and tax simplification, there's a lot more we can and should be doing. And I'm going to continue working to try to bring Republicans together to get that job done and to deliver on our promises.
Senator, thank you very much. We're joined by Peter Roskam, who at the Ways and Means Committee helped drive through the tax reform package, but he's also been an incredible watchdog on the IRS and has been looking out for taxpayers over and over and over again. And whenever there's a fight on behalf of taxpayers, Peter Roskim's out in front, on the right side. Congressman.
Thank you. Thanks, Grover.
Absolutely.
Very much. Well, it's good to be here and to participate with ATR on this event. And I think just reflecting back on H.R. 1, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, I think one of the most interesting things about it was the nature of the debate upon which it was founded. Here's what I mean by that. There was something that was deeper than simply a debate about tax policy, as important as tax policy is. Here's the deeper question that was wrestled with, and it is, what's our view of the economy? There's two competing views of the American economy that are competing for the affections of the American people right now. And they're particularly competing for the affections of millennials who are coming of age in this season. And here's the two views. On the one hand, you've got the political left that articulates a worldview that is zero-sum game economics. That is, if somebody is successful, it comes at the expense of someone else. We reject that view. Instead, we say that's not the way the economy is, and that's not the trajectory of who the American people have been, and that's not where our future lies. Our future lies in the notion that growth is good, and that growth is invitational. Now, we've got to be sensible as it relates to making sure that more people can participate in that growth. But at its foundation, H.R. 1 and its signature into law was an exoneration of this notion that growth is good. Said another way, historically, Americans have not been a jealous people. That when people are successful around us, what have we historically said? We've said, how nice for you. And here's why we say, how nice for you. We think, that could be me. That could be my children. That could be my grandchildren. And ultimately, we think there's a trajectory there. Because the economics of envy, which the political left has argued, is basically a cul-de-sac. It doesn't lead anywhere. And what we're proposing is something that's different. And I will say, as good as we thought H.R. 1 was going to be, we're surprised, actually, and very pleased at the level of which it is having an influence on people making a decision about growth. One other point, and then I'll get specific. One point is, I would suggest that if you take a step back and don't just go deep into H.R. 1 and the foundation underneath it, but you take a step back and you look at what's going on globally, we're longing for America to have a stronger influence around the world from a diplomatic point of view, just longing for it. And we see this all across the spectrum. And if America is going to have a strong diplomatic influence, it's got to be a strong military power. And in order for it to be a strong military power, it has to be a strong economic power. And it is upon that economic power that we're able to project the values that we hold dear. On a local level, I represent suburban Chicago. And if you look at the analysis simply from on the individual and the pass-through side and set aside the business relief and you simply, the corporate relief, and you only look at individuals and pass-throughs, the tax relief for the 6th District of Illinois is $1 billion in tax relief. So Grover, I know that you've been a part, ATR has been a part of driving the coalition that was successful in that. In a little bit of the world of what have you done for me lately, you know, I think people are always looking for the next thing. We were able to mark up a good package as it relates to IRS reform efforts that went through, not on a partisan roll call, but yesterday got marked up, or earlier this week got marked up on a bipartisan basis. So I think that there's cooler heads are prevailing on some of these things, and it's encouraging for me to see things getting done. I represent a very common sense Midwestern constituency that is all about accomplishment and getting things done, and they're much more interested in things being accomplished as simply arguments being made. So thanks for the invitation, and it's good to be with you today and to participate in this reflection about tax policy and how much more significant it is than simply a dollars and cents equation.
Which was more of a driver for growth? Corporate rates down, business rates down, or expensive?
You know, I've had a lot of discussions over the past several months with my constituents, and I can't tease out which one it really is. I think that just as soon as I feel like, oh, I want to say that it's the rate, then I can think through about folks who've told me about it, expensing and the downstroke, the priming of the pump that has. I think when it all comes down to it, it's a good combination of these two things and a level of predictability, that they know what the rate is going to be, they can anticipate it, they know that it's not going to be in sort of a classic extender package with an episodic and arbitrary expiration date. So I would argue maybe almost, Grover, that there was a third factor, and the third factor is the fact that it's permanent. Good. Thank you. Thanks. Good to be with you.
Thank you very much. John? Okay. Then I wanted to speak to that issue of the expensing versus rate reduction. I talked to, we're waiting on a couple of congressmen to show up in a second, but we had, was talking to the governor of Kansas, Colmer, not Brownback, the guy who just became head of the Freedom of Religion Commission, and he says they're seeing a tremendous expansion in the number of larger planes being built. And I didn't know this, but Kansas builds the middle of planes, and then they ship them up to Boeing up in Washington State. And because of expensing, American Airlines and all the other major airlines are buying a whole new collection of planes. Those are very expensive investments, but if you expense it, then rather than depreciate it over the next 10, 20, or 30 years, you expense it in year one, and it reduces the cost of capital investment. And some economists argue that's a bigger driver even than rate reduction, and they differ by industry, but it's been a very, very significant part of tax reform. It's only there for 5 years, which may encourage people to hurry up and do it now, but we'd like to obviously have that made permanent as well as the rest of the tax bill. And I would simply, I just handed a note, do mention the European Union in the discussion of tax havens. How good is our tax bill? You've seen in Bloomberg and other news outlets, they're reporting that the European Union is thinking of declaring the United States a tax haven. Sort of like, I don't know, the Seychelles and some of those little Cayman Islands and so on, where you have an island and a bank and a beach. And somehow the money goes in or out, or those are tax havens because they don't pay any taxes and people like to recognize income there. They're saying that the United States, by taking our corporate rate down to 21, which is a little bit lower than most of the European countries, although the Irish are at 12.5%, Britain's under 21, I believe, and Canada's been under 21 also, but 21 does take us down. I spent a week in Japan at the government's request, the Japanese government's request, please explain what's going on with tax reform after the bill passed. And their view, this is to the comment that tax reform has affected the United States standing militarily in the world because we can afford, we'll be able to afford more defense spending. You have a situation where their comment was, they're worried, they say we have 30 years. If China doesn't eat us in the next 30 years, and this, they all said this, by the way, so it's like on the talking points for all the top guys over there. If China doesn't eat us in the next 30 years, their demographic challenges are so severe that they cease to be a threat to Japan and the neighbors. So the question is, can we keep them sort of inside China being pleasant with people instead of outside China being unpleasant with people? And they thought this tax cut makes the United States competitive in ways that it wasn't, makes them permanently competitive in ways that it wasn't. It is going to so strengthen the American economy that it advantages Japan, which has been doing better recently, but has had a kind of rough decade or two in terms of slow economic growth. And they view this tax cut as central to Japan's independence and ability to stay outside of China's political orbit, and which was a surprise to me. I mean, they were thinking, they were playing chess and I was still playing checkers, and when they were asking about the tax bill, it was about Japan's survivability as a nation, not simply the cost of American rice. And then lastly, and then we'll close up, take any questions, but we'll finish up here. The effort to make these tax cuts permanent will continue. I know there's going to be bills in both houses to make sure that we have another vote where all the Democrats will get to either vote again against your pay increase or change their mind and decide to be supportive of the tax bill that passed in terms of making it permanent. So with that, we'll close out the conference here, and if there's a question or two, I can take it, but we may have answered all questions. Yes, no? Okay, thanks for joining us.